What's up, Rad fam? Welcome back to another episode of the Rad DAO podcast. Today, my guest is Ted, the Chief Product Officer of the Daylight Protocol, and they are boldly claiming that they are DeFi's first true wealth generation protocol. Is that true? Well, we're going to find out. But before we do that, I'm going to need you to smash that like and subscribe button on YouTube and leave me a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Why am I wearing sunglasses? Well, because the future looks very bright for the Daylight Protocol indeed. Dad joke. With that, let's get into episode 5 of the Rad DAO podcast. Let's go.
Guys, I'm Ted from Project Daylight, and we're basically going to do sort of a dive into the project, what it is about, a lot of pressing questions on what Daylight actually is. Is it another sort of a deflationary coin that's come out of nowhere trying to innovate in the bear market, or is it actually the world's first true wealth generation protocol as defined by the project founders, as well as its activated minded community? So big props and thank you in advance to RadDad for bringing me onto this podcast.
I'm excited to have you, man. I'm excited to have you.
And let's get right into it. Whatever you want to shoot.
Why don't we start with you? So, who are you in the project, and how did you get here? I mean, I'm curious always about the people behind the project, which is my personal interest in these things. So, who is Ted?
100%. So, I'm Ted, and I basically founded the Project Daylight with a few other people that are actively working on the protocol in and out of the scenes. And a lot of my background actually is in cryptocurrency itself. So I primarily started with a lot of startups, starting from real estate, e-commerce, prop tech, a lot of things like that. But eventually, I got into private equity exclusively in blockchain, where I started working with some of these bigger firms in the space like Parsec, RevRacing, the Sandbox, a lot of these Animoca brand branches. We even did works with XYO, etc. So primarily, a lot of my job was involved with investments into these firms, but also doing management consulting on marketing, on PR, on development for a lot of, their activities, their organizational ongoings that, they would outsource or they wouldn't manage themselves. So sort of what we had was an investment arm and also modification to these projects to ensure that they succeed up to a certain point that would be beneficial for us and for them, as well as the investors in their ecosystem. So from then on, I had a big, deep interest in DeFi projects when we were incubating certain DeFi native projects. Some of them were cross-chain dexes, some of them were derivative dexes, a lot into the realm of deep DeFi that goes beyond just buying and selling a token on a chart, looking at price action, looking at price movement, and more to do with liquidity pools, more to do with yield farming, sort of a lot of the exciting stuff, right? And then from then on, I started creating, as well as, advising a lot of bigger and upcoming DeFi projects that have high potential. I'm not talking about the ones that, they do a few $1,000 raise and then they expect to moonshot, but a lot of the ones with real technology out there, a lot of the ones with an actual aligned vision to creating something better, to creating something innovative. And what I did for a lot of these DeFi projects is I helped them raise capital, I incubated them, I marketed them, and with those capabilities sort of comes a question: why don't you create your own DeFi projects? So if you can do it for others, why don't you do it for yourself? Therefore, that's what I started doing. And I banded with a team of people that have a very similar mindset to mine. We co-invested in a lot of projects together before, had some great innovative ideas, and we came together to form Project Daylight in the bear market, defined it as the bear market killer, boldly, very, very bold move. And then, claimed it to be DeFi's first true wealth generation protocol. And there are reasons behind that. There are reasons that this name stands as a marketing placebo as well in certain people's opinions. They think that, how is a true wealth generation if the price can go down? But there is also some truth element to why we call it and brand it that way. So that's basically what I'm here to talk about, and more about Project Daylight. Why is it so cool? Because in my opinion, having certain transactions on mainnet that are the first ever executed, but also some of these innovative tokenomics that we've come up with, still blow my mind till today. And having not seen them implemented in DeFi before really surprises me, because it goes to show that there is still a lot of untapped potential in this industry to discover.
Oh, that's really cool, man. So you've obviously seen a ton of projects start up. You've probably seen some that have been really successful. You've probably seen a lot more that ultimately didn't make it in the end, being in your VC world. So I guess
Yeah.
my question is, how did you take a look at sort of your history with projects and then cherry pick out the best parts of each one of those when you were building Daylight to make it more successful over the long run?
So a lot of what we did, and what a lot of what I personally did was liaise with like a lot of PR firms, work as a middleman with a lot of marketing firms, as well as utilize internal resources, developers, blockchain technology, and partnerships. It's sort of playing, when you're in a VC that invests in multiple projects, and this is the truth about a lot of VCs, is sort of playing monopoly with all these projects that you invest in, and saying, hey, I'll do advisory for you. Advisory means introductions. Advisory makes doors open easily for you, and then I'll just go to another project that I invested in and say, these guys have a cool technical integration. Oh, they have a DEX. Maybe you should list on them. I'm gonna get you guys to talk together in a room. It's up to you as to how you continue this conversation. This is my invoice for this month. We've invested in your project, but we're also receiving money from your project. And that's how we operate as blockchain VC. It's somewhat, people will think it's unethical in a way. People will think it's not beneficial, but at the same time, it does bring, a lot of benefits to the different parties involved, because they are able to bridge connections via us, while also having to not go through the trouble paying someone else a higher fee, or not go through the trouble of waiting a very, very long wait list to talk to other big projects.
I don't think that's any different, excuse me, than the real business world. If I'm a venture
Yeah,
capitalist in traditional finance and I've got a bunch of startups under me, I'd be making connections all day long and probably still taking a cut, right? So I think it's just the
exactly.
how. I mean, I think the fact that a lot of this takes place on the internet in Telegram, and we may or may not know who the people are behind it. I think that is the key difference. But I don't know. I see it as the same thing in crypto or as in traditional finance.
100%, 100%. And some of the things that happen in a VC environment is you always want to play the back cop when you're a VC with some of these projects, and say that, hey, I can do it for this much, but if you're not interested, we're not interested as well, because in the end you have leverage over them because you've invested in them. And that's something, that comes to a lot of the fears in DeFi in the terms of project owners itself, and how they're susceptible to a lot of exposure, a lot of weaknesses that are built up by these VCs. These VCs technically hold considerable amounts of share in your company. They're ready to be dumped on the open market at any time within your liquidity pools, or within, other markets such as centralized exchanges. And that's sort of where the leverage edges in. So it is a very controversial, but at the same time very fascinating and lucrative world, and that is decentralized money, decentralized finance for you.
But I think the thing to remember here is that all these projects need capital, and to raise it in a pre-sale, they may or may not get what they need in order to actually be successful with it. And then if the money runs out, then the developer's motivation often runs out, and then that's when things start to spiral downwards. So to be well capitalized from the beginning, I think sets them up, even if it's in a VC situation where they sort of owe people. I mean, I'd rather see people capitalized, especially in a market like this, where they've got probably a little more ways to go before like the real user base comes back through.
Yeah.
I'd rather them be set up for success for the long run than have this like wimpy cash infusion at the beginning and then have it just peter out, right?
Yeah. It's also very dependent on the type of project you're running, because if you are creating something that is very decentralized finance worthy, the sort of capital that you want to raise is from loyal individual investors that are sort of contributing back into your system. And then once you have revenue streams generated, you can contribute back into them. Because if you have no revenue streams generated and the only thing you're relying on is new investors to come in to feed the old ones, essentially what it becomes is a Ponzi. And that's something that a lot of people don't really realize as to how capital is raised in different scenarios and how advantageous it can be when raised from different sources. Now, if you're something like Illuvium or the Sandbox, which is a massive blockchain game, it's always better to take the liability off yourself as well as your investors that will come in later by having VC money flow in. You give them a fancy NFT or some block of land or some bullshit, and then they'll be very happy with it because they're seeing the prices always go up. And then once they're able to cash out because of their vesting terms, their super long vesting terms as well as their cliff periods, etc., then that's when you can see new money, new capital flow in from interested investors that are actually looking to stay in your ecosystem for a very long time. So if things are handled carefully on the investment side from the project itself with the strategic and systematic approach, there is a lot of room for success, right? But if you're, t- going off on a tangent and then saying that I'm going to take investors' money and then I'm sort of going to pray and hope that more investors come in, essentially it does become a Ponzi like everything else that it requires a new inflow of capital or an inflow of community to come from somewhere else in order to keep something going.
And I think we've seen that a lot in DeFi, especially over the last 3-4 months now. When the hype dies, when the users leave, what's left of the project, right? And there's this old saying that, if you picture a river flowing, on the bottom of that river, there's always big rocks. But when the water level drops, that's when you see them. So that's when you see the problems or the challenges that a protocol actually experiences.
100%.
But you don't see it when the cash is flowing like it's free basically. So
100%.
no, that's really good, man. Obviously, we are here to talk about daylight, and I do want to talk about this because I think this is a perfect setup. We look at these projects that do fall apart when liquidity dries up or whatnot, but I don't think it's because A, they don't have an ecosystem built around it. They're a single dApp trying to do something, and B, there's sort of no external revenue source to keep them going. And I think those are the two sort of things we're seeing a lot more of with new startups is we can keep this project funded via whatever external resource, or we've got this ecosystem to keep money within house, but still generate solid yield while we wait for the next user base. So what kind of approaches is Daylight taking to sustainability given the fact that we're in such a shit market right now?
Of course. So Project Daylight is a token that's intrinsically designed, and as I mentioned before, does not rely, at least in the future, on new investors coming in all the time because what we've built from day one is a revenue source itself. So we've built the DEX, which is a revenue source from day one. We have swap fees like any other DEX that, of course, feed back into our ecosystem and bolster the project itself, right? But on top of that, swapping on our DEX not only gives us revenue, but it sort of has certain mechanisms embedded into the router that enable it to not only grow the daylight token, but also our predefined floor price. So our predefined floor price started off at 1 cent, which was 1% of the actual market price. And it's something that we've come up with that's really innovative to ensure that our project, no matter what happens, even if liquidity is 100% depleted, it will never enter a bank run because it can still be redeemed for an underlying price, right? The floor price is currently almost 2 cents now, which is almost 100% growth since launch about 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And sort of what we have in our ecosystem is an ever growing and ever appreciating floor price that is part of the result of tokenomics, volume, revenue sources, a lot of the likes, right? So Project Daylight, and what makes it unique is it's created as a sustainability and a true wealth generation token with a defined minimum downside risk and an infinite upside risk, starting at a very low supply, a very low market cap, and its supply is deflationary, meaning that scarcity factor is going to become a kicker in the ass once it exponentially grows. And then when it becomes very rare and supply deflates over time and the floor price increases over time, what we've sort of created is digital gold and true wealth storage, right? Because these tokens can never be minted again. They sell themselves down into the liquidity pool for additional rewards. And then part of the taxation that we have is that when you sell the daylight tokens, that part of the tax is actually also burned directly from the liquidity pool, meaning that it raises the price for that portion of the tax. And then another portion of the tax redeems the daylight token, taking out money from the floor price, but also burning those tokens that are backed by that amount of the floor price, and then buying back and burning daylight on our decks. So everything basically feeds back into the project itself. And you have our farms and pools that are paying out very, very well per day, especially I would say the long farm at the moment, as well as the MDB plus farm. People have reported anywhere between 1 to 5% per day, and that's even more than some of my favorite protocols like drip, etc., that were paying constant 1% rewards per day.
Yeah.
But what happens with some of those protocols, and even though as much as I like them, is that they are inflationary in nature and require very, very high volume of work to be done on the project side as well as on the investor side to keep it at a stability level that is recognizable and respectable. And that's what we see with a lot of projects that are giving out huge amounts of rewards, but then when people cash out those rewards that are inflationary, there's nothing to support this in order for the protocol to bounce back up. It's not something that you can consider longevity or sustainability because of the inflationary nature and because of the lack of support at the bottom. But I'm not here to talk about how other protocols are doing things wrong. There are a lot of these projects that I am self-invested in. I love them because of how lucrative they are to get in early and to profit at a very, very fast rate. But at the same time, I'm saying that we're building something different. We're building something deflationary, but at the same time, it emits rewards through a pre-distributed amount where it gets reimbursed with every transaction over time.
No, man. So I brought up your farms on the screen for the audio listener here because I think this is an important distinction. So I did a fair bit of farming last year, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons about how farms operate and the fact that most farms are just constantly inflationary. Like every block, X number of tokens are going to get minted
Yeah.
forever. And that may decrease over time, that may increase over time, that may stay static. But the point is the supply is completely inflationary. And when the supply is inflationary, it means the price will likely go down. So I think it's interesting what you've done here. And I'm curious about this burn function that you've got. Like, so just for my own understanding, if I sell 1,000 daylight tokens, and normally that would go right back into the liquidity pool, and then it would adjust the ratios, and then that would cause your price impact. So is that basically a portion of those 1,000 never get there, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So to explain it into more detail, we've got a 20% sale tax, which means that only 800 go back into the liquidity pool, right? But here's also where the magic happens, right? 40% of that 200, which is going to be 80 tokens, gets burned from supply completely. And what this does is it raises the floor price because now you're backing, let's say we have $50,000 back in backing. That $50,000 in total is backing 80 less tokens than it currently is, right? And then we've got another 20%, which is reimbursing our reward wallet. So basically, instead of emitting new rewards over time, it goes back into our reward wallet, which is paying out a percentage of that wallet's cumulative value per day, right? So if yesterday we paid out 1%, um, we're going to pay out 1% based on today's value, and therefore the rewards will never completely be depleted because they're not at a constant of what it was on day one, but it is at a constant of what it was on today and how much is left in that wallet. Now, for the other taxes, we've got 20% for something called the sell burn. And sell burn is something so innovative that we came up with. We ran the first transaction on testnet a month or two ago, and we were really excited about it because it actually worked. So, sell burn is when you sell 20% of that, which is we're talking about 40 tokens out of those 1,000. What happens is that those 40 tokens are sold into the liquidity pool. Um, and then what happens is that that money that we get from selling it is used to buy back and burn daylight, right? The BUSD. But at the same time, the 40 tokens that are sold down into the liquidity pool never actually hit the liquidity pool and are burned completely. And then it automates a burn of 40 tokens, which is the same amount in the liquidity pool itself, shifting the ratio and actually increasing the price during that particular transaction knots. And then we've got the last tax, which is the redeem buyback. So the redeem buyback takes the other 40 tokens, which is the remaining 20% of the taxes, and then it redeems the floor price that is backing that amount of tokens and uses that amount to once again buy back and burn daylight on the DEX. Every time you do a buy on the DEX, there are swap fees, which not only are returned to the liquidity pools, not only do they buy back and burn daylight on the DEX once again, but they also inject cash into the floor price directly on every single transaction.
That's
So
really
those are
that's
some of
really
the
interesting. So you've got basically a lower sell impact because of the burn mechanism. Then you've got
correct,
a portion of it that's actually creating buy pressure because it's buying back, but then it burns
correct.
those. So it's sort of like this infinite loop of either diminished sell pressure or increased
Yes.
buy pressure. That's really cool.
Yes. So one of the things that we saw in the market is that what happens, especially in a bear market, with a lot of the inflationary tokens, for instance, or a lot of the high yield reward generation protocols, which is of course their only utility, is that once supply starts to exceed demand, this is where the point goes down, right? And if you cannot do anything to make demand come back up and reach supply once more, you're not going to be able to save the protocol on time. So our solution was not how do we get demand to exceed supply, but then our solution was that if demand declines, supply should also decline at the same time.
Interesting. So just going back to this rewards or this, I guess this floor price is that a
Right.
pool of funds like an insurance fund or like, and did you seed that initially or is that all collected via the tax structure that you've got going on?
So we seeded 35,000 initially, which is 1% of the supply, which was initially 3.5 million. Now we have only about 2.8 million tokens. And what it is it's actually a contract called Daylight Redeem. And we've put BUSD into that contract, currently standing about over a little over 50,000 BUSD within that contract itself, and those funds can never be removed from that contract unless you redeem tokens for them, right? So if you were to redeem a token right now, you would get 1.8 cents per token, and the market price is standing at around 60-ish cents. So our basic fundamental idea was that we have a flow price and then we have a market price that is guaranteed to trade approximately 30 to 50 times at minimum above the floor price, which is exactly what it's doing right now. So once the floor price gets to 10 cents, for example, we can almost guarantee that there is no possible way for the market price to drop below one, because as the floor price moves up exponentially, then the supply is actually depleting logarithmically, right? So it's sort of a mathematical transition into that correlation, but the point is that as we progress within that flow price, the minimum downside risk that is defined becomes greater over time. And then, that way investors at least have the minimum safety net that they are not guaranteed within a lot of other projects, because liquidity can deplete, you can have a bank run, the token can go to zero. And
Yeah,
one
I
more
think it's
interesting,
sorry,
sorry,
continue.
one more interesting thing to note about the floor price and the market price is that it's not impossible for the market price to go below the floor price. So hypothetically, if we were to say that the floor price is at $1, for instance, and the market price was at 10 cents, right? What happens over here is there is an unimaginable arbitrage opportunity created where you can buy the market price at 10 cents, putting so much buy pressure over there, and you can redeem it for zero tax at $1 per token. And what happens is that it burns the supply completely at that point, puts so much buy pressure into the liquidity pools because you're instantly getting a 10x that is guaranteed by buying the market price and redeeming for the floor price, right? So, we've talked to some people, we've even talked to some developers. If this opportunity ever happens, they're ready to, you know, put their entire mortgage into buying the tokens and then redeeming for the floor price.
I'm sure they've
So
got their sniper bots on the ready.
100%,
Yeah.
100%, because it is an insane arbitrage opportunity that is created, and because it's decentralized and non-custodial, we have no control over it, and anyone can actually do it.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to do things. I think I am not a developer, but from the way you've explained it, it makes a ton of sense, and I think it's a really smart way to go. Now, I'm
100%.
curious. Let's go back to the farms for a second because I think we glossed over those here. I'm just going to pull it back up. So, you've got a few different pools on the go right now, and TVL's looking, pretty strong considering market conditions. Like you've got almost, I think, over $500,000 in this maxi pool. But
Yeah,
can you explain for the audience sort of the difference between your maxi, your short, and your long pools, just so I understand?
of course. So if we go back to the maxi, um, over there we can see under rewards that it says zero daylight, and there's actually a reason for this, right? So Maxi is a single staking pool with the lock time of 14 days, after which you can either unlock it or just keep it in there to continue earning tokens. So Daylight Maxi basically gives you a token called Maxi, and what it does is it auto compounds your earnings every single day, so that you are, getting a compound factor on your earnings, and that Daylight Maxi token sort of serves as a rebase kind of token inside your wallet itself. And what happens is when you claim them, or when you decide to withdraw your earnings, you're burning those Daylight Maxi tokens, and you're getting, the one-to-one amount for Daylight back. So it's sort of a placeholder that we put in more for technical feasibility than anything else, because these rewards are not directly emitted and therefore cannot be compounded in such a way.
Yeah, I've seen
Now,
some other projects that use like an X whatever token as sort of the
yeah,
placeholder. The same idea, I think.
of course. So it's sort of like going back to Olympus and Wonderland times, where they actually wrap the token and they give you a wrapped version of the token, and it's sort of what we did over here, but we just named it Maxi instead of W Daylight or something.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I think most people don't want to go back to Olympus and Wonderland times, though.
yeah, yeah. Those times were crazy though, and it just goes to show how high potential is in DeFi, especially in such phenomenal bull runs. I know, I've personally spoken to and known people that have made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in Wonderland money, for instance.
Yep.
It's just unimaginable.
And I know about twice that many people that were staring at that type of money, and then it all went away real quick.
100%, 100%, 100%.
Brutal. But no,
So
but that's not what's happening here.
yeah,
So okay, so Daylight Maxi you are rewarded in Maxi as sort of a placeholder token that then burns when you decide to redeem it, and then comes back as Daylight tokens.
yes.
Got it.
So we do have the other ones, that are the Daylight Farm Short and the Daylight Farm Long. So the only difference between each of these farms is obviously the lock time, which is 14 days versus 180 days. But on top of that, of course, the reason there is a different lock time is because of the amount of rewards that it actually gives, right? So Daylight Farm Short and Daylight Farm Long are yield farming pools that enable you to stake your LP tokens in Daylight BUSD and earn Daylight tokens as a reward for that, in order to offset impermanent loss or just to get rewards in general, right? So a lot of the people have reported that Daylight Farm Short is currently paying out about 0.5 to 1% daily, and Daylight Farm Long is paying about 1% to 1.5% uh, daily. And one of the reasons that they're sort of close to each other, I would say, is because Daylight Farm Long has so much TVL locked into it. I think it's almost $300,000 at this point, and that is, enabling us to have very very deep liquidity, but at the same time enabling these people to get rewards. Now, of course, the percentage has been lowered because $300,000 versus a mere $60,000 in liquidity is just in LP tokens, is sort of diluting the other guys as well.
Very
So
interesting.
actually, to be more accurate, I think it's about 50,000 in Daylight Farm, just looking at these LP amounts, and then it's approximately 210,000 in daylight farm long.
Okay, okay. And then so that these people are locking their daylight, which then supports the liquidity of your Orion decks that you've built
Correct.
out. And okay. And so I guess the long makes sense. Then you want people to keep it in the pool for as long as possible, and but instead they're earning better rewards because of it. So they're
100%.
they're taking the risk. Cool. And then I also
100%.
see you've got a partner farm down here in the MDB, or the, I think it's Million
Yeah.
Dollar Baby if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. So we're actually part of the MDB Plus Alliance, which means we use MDB Plus as a token in our liquidity pools. MDB Plus is sort of a stable appreciating asset with a 1% total in and out tax that enables us to have a liquidity pool that is ever appreciating along with their price as well. So, for instance, if MDB Plus goes up 20% in the next 5 months, so does Daylight in terms of value in that liquidity pool itself. No matter what the price is at that time, it has that sort of appreciation added to it. And therefore, we have partnered up with them to create some innovative farm and some, sustainable portal that also supports us, but at the same time supports them with transactional volume. So Daylight MDB Plus has a shorter lock time, but we're considering actually moving the lock time down even lower to encourage the volume of MDB Plus, because when MDB Plus is bought or sold, it goes up in price, and this only does good for our project itself because our value in the liquidity pool is also increasing at the same time. This one approximately paid out. I think people reported it paid out 5% or something on the first day. I think the first two people that got in before we even announced it, they sort of just went in there and they started farming it, and then currently pays out anywhere between 1 to 1.2% per day.
Those are phenomenal yields, especially in this market conditions. I didn't actually know
And
much
considering
about.
it's deflationary,
Oh, that's the thing, right? You're owning a token that's going to appreciate in value. I didn't know much about the Million Dollar Baby team, but then I got they bought out Ooze, which was sort of one of those ROI DApps based on an
yeah,
NFT, and that's how I kind of my first exposure to them. So it's good to see them across the space, making partnerships, because I think that's what it's going to take if they're going to survive.
100%. I think the thing with Ooze is that MDB has this program called the Gravity Project where they
Yeah.
take over the project liquidity and they refund the investors either with some sort of stable asset or MDB or MDB Plus and sort of absorb them in their ecosystem. It's sort of a respectable thing that they're doing because not only are they helping the investors recoup some sort of investment from a failed or defunct project, but at the same time they're very largely benefiting with a new set of eyes and a new set of community edition that it's a very respectable and it's very commanding, but at the same time very smart move.
I totally agree. And it's, I was talking to the Sidekick Finance guys actually. That episode's going to
Yeah.
come out next week. And they are very much of the same mind where they think that the way we're going to get through this bear market and sort of drive the next leg of adoption is through connecting really solid communities across the space to have this network of trust. Because I think there's so many fucking scams in the space that it's just impossible for people that are coming in now to sort, through what's good and what's not good. But if there's sort of like this, ecosystem of not necessarily directly connected like projects in this case, but just sort of peripheral projects that say, yeah, these guys are solid, these guys are solid, these guys are solid, and having that base, I think that that's what's going to take DeFi, because DeFi is not a big place, right? It's amazing how quickly you can run into friends in random groups, even if you didn't know they were going to be there in the
Yeah.
first place. So it's good to have these partnerships going.
I think one of the most important things for a lot of projects that are especially starting out is to have partnerships on a technical integration level that actually benefits your protocol, as opposed to a lot of these hype or marketing bullshit partnerships that are just a placebo for a bunch of crap and don't actually benefit anyone in the future, because a lot of these can actually be misleading and then tell you that, oh, this project's supported by this and therefore they're good, but it's actually some sort of marketing scam or bullshit. There's no real technical integration. That's the thing I see with a lot of just random projects partnering up and then saying I partnered up with Pink Sale and I put their badge on my page and then I'll become like God or something. But it's a bunch of bullshit. You need real technical integrations to make feasible as well as realistic partnerships You need to be using their product. They need to be using yours to have it actually make sense, to actually make it realistic, and that's what the smart investor recognizes.
Yeah, I mean, just because you use somebody's product or that you've, contributed in some way doesn't mean you're partners. It just means you're
Of
using
course,
their service, right? They
of
don't
course.
necessarily endorse you, but I think that's how people think about it. They're like, "Oh my god, Pink Sale loves these guys. I'm going
Yeah,
to invest because of that trust." But meanwhile, they have no fucking clue who you are. You just happen to use their
100%.
service one time. No, that's cool. So, partnerships, good segue. I think I saw an announcement. Are you guys doing something with Seifu? What's the deal there?
So Seifu and Daylight got together a lot in the light of their new first ever L1 rebasing blockchain called SafuuX, right? So SafuuX is going to be launching in January 20th, and they have this development program called the Skyway program or the Skyway Partnership, and Daylight is basically SafuuX's first ever Skyway partner, right? And what we're actually going to be doing on SafuuX is we're going to be having our Apollo launchpad, of course, on the BNB chain natively, but we're going to be porting it over to SafuuX when we're done. And there is a possibility that I will launch a daylight variant on SafuuX when their stablecoin SUSD comes out. Right? A lot of people don't know about SUSD yet, but I'm just gonna let it out over here. So I'm probably gonna call it something really, corny like DayX or something. But it's definitely gonna happen when the time is right. So Apollo Launchpad is a bit different to a lot of the non-custodial launchpads such as PinkSale, Gempad, and brings more to the table for projects that are willing to get on new blockchains or even on mature ones like the BNB chain. So what we're going to be doing on SafuuX is we're going to be facilitating a service, or rather providing a portal for projects to come to us, not only to get their fundraising done, not only to get exposure, but also to get incubation, if they require it. So incubation includes a lot of things like management consulting, gaining capital from a lot of different sources, and not only retail investors. It includes a lot of help on development, advisory, on product knowledge. And these are some of the stuff, that I picked up from my experience being in VCs, being having a background in venture capital, and it's sort of pulling people together. So, one of my co-founders, Roshan, who is the CEO of Daylight, he's actually an accredited, auditor at Deloitte, one of the big four, and he's very well versed with not only real estate but also technological audits, and a lot of economical models. So he helps me. He basically takes a look at a lot of these projects, and we get together along with our DAO that's called the Apollo DAO to make decisions on what projects get to launch in Apollo, because they have to pass a certain criteria. We're not strong arming projects in a way, saying that, hey, you have to be KYC'd or whatever with us, or audited with us, or pay us a ridiculous amount of money. But what we're doing is, and we're not, of course, telling them pay us money for this badge, pay us money for promotion like PinkSale and Gempad do. But what we're doing is we're taking a look at their technology, and we're understanding if their minimum product is really viable, if they're technically feasible in the long term, if there is longevity factored into their project. Otherwise, it's just not worth bringing it to our investors, SafeUX's investors, um, as well as all our other partners in the ecosystem, DAO communities, groups, private groups that we'll be having connects with in order to help each of these projects achieve their goals. Because in the end, we are self-invested in some of these projects ourselves, and it is a liability for us if some of these projects are not being able to last in the long term, or if the people behind them have malicious intentions. We just outright refuse them. We wouldn't say anything bad, and we'd go on to the next project that's trying to book with us.
No,
So
that's
that's
really
basically Apollo Launchpad. That's what we're doing on SafeUX. We're bringing sustainable, vetted, as well as truly incubated projects onto the blockchain, and being a hub for innovation as well as decentralization, and having an advocacy for better decentralized economy in general.
I think there's an important distinction there because I think people hear about launch pads, or they may have even used a launch pad before, but they got to understand the difference between something that is gives you the ability to launch a project and then what you're doing, which is actually incubating a project. You're making the
Yeah,
connections, you're doing the business development and setting them up for a successful launch, as opposed
of
to
course.
here's a platform, input all your information, hit go, and then they can, promote it out to their people. So I think that draws on your experience in the past of, working with these projects and then also
Yeah,
developing one of your own and taking that expertise and applying it to everybody else. So I think that's
100%.
a pretty solid model.
Like just to give you an example, if a project came to us and then they're like, we don't know where to go next, we don't know what decks to list on, we don't know what sort of products can help us, what communities we can be exposed to. And this is just a hypothetical example. If let's say XYZ wanted to launch on SafuuX and they came to us, I'd say, SafuuX has their decks, which we're actually well connected with, because we're their primary launch pad on the chain, which has exclusive rights to be their Skyway partner. We'll get you in touch with the team at Safu, and we'll get you a DEX listing as well as exposure, some nice announcements, some AMAs in both our communities to actually bolster your network while at the same time contributing to your investor base, if not your project as a whole. And then apart from that, we could go over to our partners at the Rebellion project, and then we can tell them, hey, there's a new project that's looking for sort of an LMS system. So the Rebellion has their RMS, which is a spin-off of the LMS that is EVM compatible, right? So it can be used on technically any EVM compatible chain. And then we can say that, hey, this project's launching on SafuuX. They want some additional liquidity support. Can you provide their tech to them? And we'll integrate them together. And then we can also go to MDB, for instance, and say, we've got a project that requires help in liquidity support. They want to purchase some MDB Plus tokens in order to have a better, ever appreciating liquidity pool. We're going to connect you guys. And these are just some of the things that we are aiming to do. And therefore, we've built rapport with technically integrated partners that, we are able to use their technology, but not only us, and the projects that are listing on our decks as well as Launchpad are also able to use their technology.
No, that's cool. And just for the listeners out there, if you're unfamiliar with the concept of an LMS, it's a liquidity management system, and it's basically a side contract that executes buys and sells with a pool of liquidity to maintain the price of a token in a certain range. So they look at what can be sustainable, and they arbitrage themselves, basically keeping it within a band to make sure that the price stays stable. So just want to make that note. We're not all crunchy detail nerds, but I am. But I know that some of my
Yes.
listeners aren't. So that's a great call. But I'm going to pull up your roadmap here because I think we've touched on a lot of it. But one of the things that I look for when I'm vetting a project to come on the show is, what does their roadmap actually look like? A, do they have one, which you obviously do here, but B, are they actually doing what they said they would do? So, we're obviously sitting right here in Q4 2022. You've done your pre-sale launch. The Launchpad is in development. The DEX has been released. The Burn lottery system, I believe, is live. You can confirm or deny.
No, it's
Not
not
yet.
live.
Okay, so it's the
And
last Q4 item then to get to.
yeah.
But you've
So,
also talked about a ton of this other stuff that's coming in Q1, Q2, and clearly that's in
yes,
development. This isn't some vaporware project. I mean, there's lots of stuff in the pipeline here to keep your investors happy, right?
100%. And this roadmap, I have to admit, does need a little bit of updating because we've made a lot of developments since we originally planned this roadmap. This was actually planned at inception, back in June, so it was very immature at the time, but we have accomplished what we have set out to accomplish, definitely according to this roadmap. So in Q3, we did the seed round, which we raised $180,000, filled within minutes. We did our token smart contract development. We were working on the DEX. We were engineering the Daylight token. In Q4, we did our pre-sale, ended up raising 500,000. We are working on the launch pad. I have even released some screenshots, some sneak peeks of this in our Discord. And then we are working, we have done the DEX release already, and we are actually working towards listing our very first token that you know will be will be released soon. I mean, more details will be shared soon on it, and we're also currently working with two different projects that are eager to get onto the Apollo launchpad before the launchpad even releases, right? So one thing we do have to change of there is the burn lottery system that we haven't really incorporated yet, because what we'd like to do is we'd like to set it out at a much later stage when the supply is really scarce, to enable some sort of FOMO when it comes to the burn lottery system. So how it actually works is that you sort of put your tokens into a pool, and you have the chance of winning a big pot of prizes in daylight tokens, and then the excess daylight tokens that are taken from that pot are actually burnt forever, right? So we think, currently people are accumulating from the pools and farms. So it is technically not a right time to put this into action, because there is a lot of money locked up within those farms. And maybe when it releases, maybe when people have more tokens to play around with, they'd be interested in such a concept.
I think that's
But
fine. I
something
don't think
that,
there's anything wrong with sort of rejigging the roadmap as
of
you know,
course,
you have to react to market conditions and you also have to prioritize your development. So if it's not the right time for that, then I wouldn't release it. I think investors these days are quite skittish, and I think they sort of latch on like, you said you were going to do this, but you haven't done that. But as long as you can, explain why you think
of
it's not the
course,
right time and when you think it will be implemented, if at all, I think that's it. And one of the things that I've noticed, at least hanging out in your Discord, is just the level of transparency that you and the rest of the team bring to the project. And I think that that's what buys your trust with your investors.
100%. Thank you very much for that. But something else, that's really interesting we've added into Q4 is the release of a new token called Apollo, which came as sort of a surprise and will be a Christmas gift for our community, exclusively bringing you guys what we define as the world's first true storage of wealth. Right. So I will talk about the Apollo token in more detail. I think you've, you know,
Let's
constantly reminded me
let's
about
go there,
your
man. Let's
question
go
on
there.
that. So, of course, why not? So the Apollo token itself is what we define as true storage of wealth. And why I say this is because it's a token that is created with sort of a moderate tax pool. So it's 8% in and 8% out. And it's a spin off on XUSD, which was also, which is basically the white label solution for a lot of these stable appreciating assets, such as MDB Plus, such as, they provide the white label solution. I mean, PUSD, etc. So Apollo is actually not a white label solution of XUSD, but more of a spin off on it and a standalone. And it is an ever appreciating token, which means it can never go down in price, right? So on every single buy, sell, or transfer, you've got a certain taxation that enables the token's price to go up constantly. And how this is done is because we do not use liquidity pools at all for this token. It is 100% collateralized by BUSD, meaning, it's not going to lose its peg unless BUSD loses its peg. So it's not actually a pegged token, but it is an ever appreciating token that has more BUSD in the contract backing one token over time. Right? It of course starts out at $1 like a stable coin, but on the first transaction, 3% of that transaction is going to raise the price. And on the first sell, 3% of that transaction is going to raise the price again. And how this happens is that when you buy the token, you're minting it, but when you sell the token, you're completely burning it, and you're taking out money from that backing contract to pay yourself for burning that token. So it sort of works just like Daylight's floor price, but without the market price essence.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this one, man. It sounds intriguing. I'm trying to poke holes in it, but I'm also not a developer. So, how have you back tested that idea? Like, has it been stress tested under like extreme
Yes.
quote unquote sell conditions?
Yes, so we've actually just we've released it on mainnet already, but under a different name, so people don't go looking for Apollo or anything like that. We've tried, tested it, bought, sold, transferred everything, and then we finally redeemed the entire supply to get back, the money that was initially in there. So that's sort of how it actually works, and it's something that can ensure that people have an asset that has an APY over time, but can also never be depleted because it doesn't actually utilize liquidity pools, but fully collateralized assets that are within a contract that can never be taken out unless you're redeeming the token, which means you're selling it. But one thing very interesting about the Apollo token is it's going to have very innovative tokenomics in the future in terms of governance, um, as well as launchpad access, right? So if you hold Apollo tokens, there is a possibility that you have better launchpad access depending on the amount you hold, and you also have voting power within the protocol on some of the projects that are able to go on this launchpad, as well as some of their sales structures, right? And a lot of it can, also adhere back to Daylight and how it operates, becoming a fully decentralized organization, a decentralized community. The Apollo token gives you rights to become an elite citizen, which gives you a lot of different perks within our Discord, our ecosystem, and also the possibility to become a DAO member if you hold a certain number of tokens. So, as you can see in Q1 next year, we're opening up our VC fund where we'll be investing not only in some of these projects that we incubate on our launch pad at a very high level and not a molecular level like retail investors do, but we'll also be, getting in touch with a lot of some of my connects as well for private deal flows, right? So from private equity, we always share contacts, we always share a lot of deal flows, and there will be opportunities. So for instance, if you look at you know some of the recent deals that I have done, and not very recently, of course, it's been over a year, but some of them are Dex a lot, which was a cross chain order book Dex that is on Avalanche right now, and then there's a lot of other lucrative opportunities that we have gone into, and these are sort of the private deal flows that we are able to get a hand of because of some of the connections that we have from the past that are currently being leveraged, right? So the
That's
Apollo DAO, for instance, will be able to get with me on some of these deals in pooled funds together, which are extremely lucrative because we're going in on a pre seed, on a seed mode into VC funded projects that will inevitably blow up at some point, even if there is a decline in the future.
that will then ultimately feed back into the ecosystem to reward holders of the tokens.
100%, because the revenues that are being, the revenues, at least for us from our VC fund, or at least the profit, will be reinvested back into the treasury, will be reinvested back into our capital holdings as buyback and burn reserves, as cash injection into the token at our discretion, of course, because with those funds, with those private profits that we're making, we operate on a very private level as a private organization, right? So it's not something that's automated, but of course, at our will, at our discretion. But we'll definitely be doing it to bolster the protocol because at the end of the day, if Daylight does well, so do we.
So we go back to my original comment around, how projects are going to survive the bear market, and in my opinion, it's ecosystem and its external revenue source, and it seems like you've got both those boxes ticked.
100%. So we identified that the problem with a lot of projects is that, and this is not saying in a bad way that a lot of projects are doing the wrong thing, but it's entirely up to them how they conduct their business and how we conduct ours. We choose to do things a little differently just because we're not big fans of hoping that something goes our way, but we're trying to mitigate as much as possible. We've not only mitigated the possibility of a bank run, we've completely devoided the idea of it ever happening, with innovative mechanisms, with collateralization, with something that is constantly growing in value, but at the same time having a scarcity aspect to it. Another interesting thing to note about Apollo is that every time you buy, sell, or transfer it, sorry, not transfer, every time you buy or sell it, um, portion of the taxes is actually used to buy back and burn Daylight on the decks. So every time someone's buying Apollo or selling it, even if they're selling for huge amounts of profit, some of the money is going back into increasing the legacy token's price.
There you go. It's the circular economy that brings it all back to then support the people that
100%.
have taken the chance with the Daylight token and staked it for 180 days plus. They can now benefit from all the future development that's going on.
100%.
So
And
I don't think a lot of these. I'm with you. I don't think a lot of these projects made mistakes. I think they just they built a project that wasn't suited to the market conditions that they were actually launching in. And I think that projects that are launching now have to be more innovative. They have to think differently about how they're operating, because the conditions aren't just,
Yeah.
you could have launched Daylight Peak Bull, just straight token, no
Yeah.
utility, and it would have gone to hundreds of millions of market cap in like a couple weeks. But that doesn't mean anything, right? It's just, that's
Yeah.
just hype. I think utility, value and long-term sustainability are the things that are important right now. And I think that you've thought through a lot of these aspects. So, kudos to you and the team for actually, you know, looking ahead and saying, okay, if we want to be here in 12 months, I think we're going to have to do this. So I think
Yeah.
your investors should be happy with at least the development actions. We can't control price, right? Price
Of course.
isn't in our hands, but we can do everything that we
Looking at
can
the
as
market.
developers or project leaders to support the ecosystem and continue to bring value. And I think that that's really what the development commitment should be: is, am I continuing to add value?
100%. 100%. I think, a lot of people would rather just launch their projects in the bull market, but then it goes to speak a lot about their intentions as well, right? So, what we've done, and in my opinion, my perspective, is that we've launched something that we're brave enough to say that it's going to survive in the bear market. We're launching at the bottom. So, see our performance now, gauge it, see how well it's doing in a bear market, see how much it's been paying out. We've paid out over $100,000 worth of rewards since launch in just about 3 weeks. And the price has, it hasn't gone to zero, it's gone a bit down from its all time high. So we did actually see a peak of almost 2x the pre sale price. And probably, some people who bought at a very low price saw that it was sort of a 5 or 6x at that point for them, right? So that was something incredibly phenomenal that a lot of investors, of course, would sell at that point, but at the same time, we've picked it back up from there, going to a stable price that has barely moved within a week, even with transactional volume. So I think launching in such market conditions itself and doing considerably fair while also paying investors a steady rate is a statement in itself to show that if this was a bull run right now, this thing could actually go parabolic.
For sure. And I don't think we fault anybody for taking profit at 5 or 6x off a pre-sale price. That's not where the price should hold, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So I think
I,
it's
I
what
don't mean
happens
the
now that
pre-sale
matters,
price.
right?
Yeah, it wasn't 5 or 6x off the pre-sale price itself, but actually the initial dip after launch.
Oh, okay. That's even, yeah. That, which is still fine. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're paying a yield, you can't really have those crazy swings, because it really
of
punishes
course,
people that have locked up their tokens, right? They would rather see a more consistent price over the long term
of
and
course.
earn their rewards. So I think that's fine.
Of course, because one thing we did very smartly is we understood, and this was sort of because we had a delay on the pools and farms that were coming out by a day or two. So one thing we did very very smartly, and we understood that there would be not only people sniping us, but people that were rushing to buy the token and pair liquidity in order to get swap fees, is we sort of blacklisted, or we stopped, we disabled the creation of our pair on our dex itself, and we launched with very low liquidity. And then sort of what happened is that we saw people sell into that liquidity, exit repeatedly, and the price went down from $1 to about zero point 0.3, right? So once that happened, we understood that these are the people that were rushing to get out. These were the people that were rushing to take profit, and a lot of people that were, I guess, scared of the protocol itself. And I'm very transparent, and I told my loyal holders as well as a lot of the strong people in our community, don't worry, we've got a plan. This is how we're going to execute it, etc., etc. Right? We've got a list of measures, launch process that has to be meticulously walked through as well as executed. So just wait for the pools and farms and start earning rewards. After that, we basically refilled our liquidity from the very shallow initial that we had put in there for this sole purpose. And then the price, people started trading, some bought back in, etc., etc. the price went to an all-time high of about 1.35.
That's a smart way to do it. I mean, you can't. You're going to expect that price action pretty much off the
Of
launch of
course,
anything. But if you can mitigate the damage and reward those that are actually supporting the project ultimately, I think that's what you should be aiming
100%,
for. But Ted,
100%.
we're at about an hour now. But before we wrap, I always ask my guests because you told us about your crypto history. You've kind of given us the lay of
Yeah.
the land on Daylight. But who are you? Who are you, man? What do you do for fun when you're not staring at Discord or watching charts?
Actually, actually play some Dota 2, man.
That's old school. That's old,
With
and I'm old.
I actually play some Dota 2 with my co-founder, our CEO, and some of the guys in our team as well. And then sometimes when we get fed up or a bit mad at the game, we go and play Overwatch instead.
Oh my god. So you're on screens all the time then.
Well, that's part of it, right? But I actually live in Phuket, Thailand, very beautiful island. So I am out very often, enjoying the beach, going out to cocktail bars, working there. Just enjoying the sceneries, enjoying life in general. It is a very tiring and stressing, career path that I have chosen. Inevitably, it's decentralized finance, but at the same time, it's something that I love doing. I enjoy it. There is a lot of risk in this business. There's a lot of liability on project owners, but in order to give back for the better good to the greater world, for your betterment, your self-actualization, this is what I enjoy doing in the end. But apart from that, I do spend time, having my own hobbies. I don't watch TV much or anything, but I'll go for a drive. I'll go for coffee. I'll work. I'll read, play some games once in a while, go out once in a blue moon, and then I enjoy some food here and there. Thailand's got a great avenue for a lot of different types of food, and it's really a charm to be living in such, I would say, paradise over here. But that's sort of how my life works, how it revolves. But overall, I am in the end simply a guy who innovates cool DeFi products.
It's been an interesting trip kind of interviewing these various projects, and the developers all seem to have a similar mentality to you that this is what they like to do and this is why they do it. Because a lot of these people, and maybe you're one of them, you don't need the money, right? You're not, this isn't a get rich quick scheme. This isn't like need to feed your family kind of situation. You're building these projects because you enjoy them. But you need
I
to have
mean,
that outlet too. You need to have that break to turn off and go do that other thing. Because we were chatting before we started recording here, and I asked you, when do you sleep? Because I see you in Discord at every hour possible responding to questions.
yeah,
So I just don't burn yourself out. This is advice from
yeah,
an investor to a project leader. Don't burn yourself
100%.
out because
Thank you.
the investors need you, right? That's it's good to be there at all hours, but if you then disappear for 3 weeks because you're laid up in bed because you're too
Yeah.
tired, that's not good either, right?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I think DeFi is a very untapped industry and one of the most lucrative, if not the most lucrative industry in the world to be in. Whether you're an investor or whether you're a project owner, especially, there is a lot of potential and a lot of money to be made in a very small amount of time, right? Especially if you do things the right way. Because doing things the right way, let's say you're not rug pulling $200,000 for a quick buck, is you're actually building a report for yourself, you're actually progressing, and from then on, you can have continuous development on yourself, on your brand, on your team as players in the industry who know what they're doing, who know their shit, and definitely are bringing something good to the table once you have a successful product live. And I think that's something that's very overlooked in DeFi, and it's definitely a message out there to a lot of projects to think very, very well, tread very carefully, with every single move that you make.
No, that's a really good thing to consider because I was talking with Sam from Veracity Audits last week and we talked at length about this, but I think reputation matters or is going to matter a lot more than it has in the past. And I think that the people that
100%.
are doing these rug pulls are just so short-sighted about the amount of money they could make if they actually did something genuine as opposed to just fucking
Correct.
people over constantly. So
Correct.
I'd rather make nothing now and, make my millions later with a good reputation, and people come to me as sort of a trusted, advisor or, mouthpiece or whatever it ends up being.
Correct.
But, I'm not willing to burn my reputation for a quick buck.
Correct. And a lot of people overlook the fact that DeFi businesses are very, very real businesses as well, right? They are operational. They do provide a product or a service in some form and do have revenue streams coming in regardless of whether it's a pre-sale done or whether it's DEX swap fees or whether you sell down your own token as a profit, if you do have your own allocation. So it is very much a very real business comparable to the real world. And another thing that people don't actually realize is that DeFi businesses start out with immensely more and huge amounts of capital as opposed to a lot of traditional businesses that are coming up, right? I think, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in Thailand, if you have $10,000 in your pocket, you can open up a franchise of a coffee shop and start earning money, right? You can open up, if you've got $100,000 in your pocket, you can open up a franchise of Starbucks over here. And that in itself goes to speak volumes as to how much potential these projects actually have, because they can do a lot of things in the real world as real businesses if they represent themselves like that. Because a lot of DeFi projects, especially, let's take Daylight, for example, started out with a total capital of about $700,000. There are limitless possibilities to what you can do with this much, or let's say half the amount, $350,000, or even 20% of the amount, which is approximately, less than $200,000, right? There are a lot of things you can do with this. It can take you places. People need to start having the mindset that this is not a cash grab, but with building real utilities that actually bring you revenue sources, you can make more, more on top of more than what you initially set out to do.
Absolutely. And they sort of miss the forest for the trees, right? But
100%.
I don't think they understand what life-changing money could be if they really just put their mind to something and committed themselves to being a better human being. So I think that's a great place to park this one, man. But I really enjoyed the chat today, and I think your investors will really enjoy getting to know you a little better. So I want to thank you for coming on. It was a great conversation.
100%. I would like to also thank you, for taking the time, getting to know about Project Daylight, getting me on here, and also for keeping, stellar class during this podcast as well. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks. And we're welcome back anytime when you get the launch pad going and everything. Let's come back and talk to me about that, okay?
For sure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. Well, fam, that does it for another episode of the RadDAO podcast. Want to send a big thanks to Ted for coming on, and not only coming on, but turning your camera on as well. It's always great to see another face in the space, so I really like what you guys are doing over at the Daylight Protocol. If you want to learn more, I will drop all of the links in the show notes below, and you can check out their DApp or join their Discord. It's super active, and you'll find Ted there pretty much at all hours of the day because the guy just doesn't sleep. If you enjoyed this show or any of my previous episodes, I ask that you please like and subscribe to the YouTube video, leave me a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, and or just drop me a comment, say, hey, this was cool. I'd like that. The other thing I can ask is that you please, tweet. Follow me on Twitter, because sometimes it feels like I'm tweeting to myself, which I can live with, but it's better with friends. The monetary way in which you can support this podcast is by contributing to the MetaMask donation wallet that you'll find in the show notes below, or by using one of my referral links just below that. There's a few exchanges there, a couple Canadian ones, so if you're interested in trying any of them out, we do both get a bit of a kickback, and it goes to support the show. Thank you so much for tuning in this week, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll do this all over again next Friday. That's it for now, fam. Take care. Cheers. The RadDAO podcast is produced for entertainment and education purposes only. I know this because I'm not a licensed financial advisor. If you're thinking of investing in any of the tokens talked about during this episode, then I implore you to please do your own due diligence, and if necessary, consult with a licensed financial advisor.